welcome everyone. This is Boise Startup Week coming at you live here, and have a great panel discussion today. We're talking with an esteemed group of panelists about demystifying the recruiting process around tech and the startup world. Wanted to take a quick moment and introduce our panelists today. We have Jessica Cafferty joining us from Route Networking Group. She's a founder over there. Lauren Morris, senior UX designer over at Lovevery and publisher of the somewhat new, although I think you're 23 or 24 issues in, Good Jobs Report. Grant Stewart, senior talent acquisition specialist over at Vacasa. I think we've all stayed at one of your properties. Thanks for what you do. And Angela Holbrook, founder of Extendra Recruiting. If each of you could just do a quick introduction, we'll just take a few seconds here, give a little background on how you found yourself in the wide world of recruiting. Angela, why don't you start?
All right. So I actually started out volunteering as a recruiter at the University of Idaho. Go Vandals. I still love Broncos and other students too. So that was about 20 years ago, and fast forward to now, it's the best and the most fun part of human resources. I have a little bit of bias there. Like, honestly, helping people join organizations and making job changes is a blast. And the last 5 years, it seems like everything seems to be tech and startup in Boise is booming.
Thanks. Hey, Lauren, how about you?
Recruiting for me has been kind of a part-time gig. I'm a full-time designer, but I've always worked at companies in and around Boise that have needed to hire a lot of people. And like Lovevery is one of them. And so I've always been a part of that, trying to find people locally and just kind of building those relationships and connecting people and hopefully hiring them.
Jessica?
Yeah, I have owned Route Networking Group now for 5.5 years, and I kind of fell into recruiting because I was trying to move back to Boise, and I couldn't find an agency that I wanted to work with, so I thought, who better to do it than me, and couldn't point the finger any further, so I started the company 5.5 years ago, and here we are.
Grant?
I started in recruiting about 6 years ago now. So I was fresh out of college, and Vacasa graciously gave me the chance to hop in and start learning the world of recruiting, and still loving it 6 years down the road. So yeah, just can't beat that opportunity of pairing people with that next position that's going to be a good fit for their career.
Awesome. Well, it's really nice to have a mix of people that both work in startups, have come out of college, and Grant, you're probably the closest to having gone through this recruiting process yourself, as well as founding companies and running startups. So thank you all for joining us. And to kick things off, I think the elephant in the room, and from the questions we received, was really about what's happening right now with the pandemic and COVID and hiring processes, and really how companies and candidates are adapting to that. So to start things off, just curious if, by a show of hands, if any of you have participated in any sort of virtual recruiting, whether that be Zoom interviews or calls, or gone to networking events. Just quick show of hands. All right, it looks like almost everyone. So this is kind of the way the world is working now. And we had a lot of questions coming in around etiquette and how students can best present themselves in more of a digital format. So if anyone wants to volunteer to go first, if you wouldn't mind talking about what helps a candidate come across in a virtual setting. Let's focus on maybe a video chat as the most common form of that.
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in. So as far as etiquette goes, the good news is there's a lot of resources out there and a lot of good information, even on Handshake. A link I wanted to share that I wrote down is jobseekers.workable.com. There's a lot of different ATS systems out there. Workable is one of the ones that I've really enjoyed personally working with. You can even do practice sessions on there. As far as etiquette goes, I feel like people are adapting and being really resilient. I mean, here we are as a panel doing this together. I think first and foremost, having grace with yourself and with others is huge. Honestly, the simple things like being on time and smiling and being friendly and approachable. But from a recruiting standpoint, I'll just be really quick. The one thing I look at even bigger than the virtual interview process, the whole process is an interview. So from the very get-go, from trying to schedule and how responsive you are and all of that, I'm evaluating just as much, if not more, than the actual interview itself.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's really great feedback. You're always looking for those subtle hints and signs of what type of employee and colleague someone might be. So it is hard sometimes to stand out in a crowd. I think we've all been to the networking events, and this year at Boise Startup Week, we're doing that digitally. Just should those come back online, what are good ways for folks to stand out, to have a presence in amongst a room of really impressive people?
I would jump in and just say I would start with having your camera on, and I think it can be a little bit uncomfortable when you join some of these meetups, these virtual meetups with 50 or 100 people in it, and some people have their cameras on and some people have them off, and it just feels better if you can kind of hide. But I think to really get noticed is to have that camera on and make it as real life as possible in this kind of virtual world we live in. And I think that will go a long way as a starting point. I also think from an etiquette too is, mute yourself when you're in these bigger groups, have headphones on. If you have a good mic, have that available, good lighting as well. And a lot of these kind of virtual meetups also have like a chat component, and pop in there and show your activity. If you don't feel comfortable kind of speaking and jumping in, have a conversation there instead.
Those are great tips. I think we'll experience that on this discussion, that we'll inevitably fumble over each other. It is sometimes hard to speak up in those group settings, especially digital. You want to give everyone some time to finish their thoughts, but those are really good tips, Lauren. And Jessica, I'd be curious, just from the perspective of a recruiter, what has been most challenging for you in adjusting to the last six months here?
Oh man, well, I think that there are plenty of opportunities, I guess is how we'll look at it, right? Opportunities to grow and to adapt and change and evolve. And, one of the things that's been interesting, I mean, from my agency in particular, is we really pride ourselves on a very close-knit, relationship-driven approach to recruiting. And, because of that, even like to distill it all down, I mean, most of the time we were running meetings in person and you're meeting people face-to-face because there are so many intricacies that come along with meeting somebody in person, as we all know, that you can't really glean over a phone call and you don't easily glean over Zoom. And so it sort of ties back into these points that Lauren and Angela were making that do make it challenging from a recruiter standpoint, just as it is challenging from a candidate standpoint, because you're not able to really, dig into some of the more nuanced element of an interview, right? And when I'm interviewing somebody in person, I'm paying attention to Angela's point. I'm paying attention to how dialed into my conversation are they? Are they listening? Are they being an active listener? Are they repeating some of the words that I'm saying? Or are they answering my question directly? Are they skirting around it? Are they looking elsewhere? Are they distracted? Those are all things I'm paying really close attention to when I'm in an in-person interview. And over Zoom, you learn ways to adapt and to change, and sort of that actually kind of ties back into the previous question in terms of, a recruiting perspective. Even simple things like, making sure that while in person, if you were to go to an interview, you'd probably bring a notebook and a pen and you'd be jotting down notes. I encourage candidates to do that via Zoom. Don't have gum in your mouth. One of the worst things you can do on a Zoom interview is if you're with somebody and they're sitting there, chomping around, and you can see the gum and it's like, oh my God, you're driving me crazy. right? And they're just the little things that I've started to pick up on. I think it's easy to have distractions. One of the things I would also offer is, for example, my dog is sitting here right now, and of course, being a distraction, and just owning it and embracing it. And, I think Angela, you mentioned having grace with yourself, and instead of trying to hide it away and hide something, just calling it out can help. But I think all of us on this call can agree it's challenging on a recruiter side or as a person that's in a hiring seat, but we also are very aware of how challenging it is from a candidate standpoint, and we want to be respectful and cognizant of that.
And just one thing I want to add really quick, because it actually happened today. So there's a Boise background going on, but what candidates may not realize when you're interviewing with a hiring manager or a recruiter, they're trying to adapt to this crazy world too. And I've been working remotely from home, and we have a new puppy, and there's been a couple of times where, UPS drops off a package, and here I am trying to be professional, and then the dog starts barking, and just to use it as an opportunity to laugh at yourself, and then it disarms them, and then they start laughing, and then you find out you have things in common. And so I've actually really enjoyed that, because I try really hard to get people comfortable, because then they tend to share more. And if you're going to laugh at yourself, and like Jessica said, just own it. We're all human, and we're all trying to adapt and be resilient. So I think from a job seeker standpoint, just graduating or wherever you're at, just remembering like you're talking with another human that's also trying to adapt and just trying to be a good matchmaker. And the more open and transparent we all are, just the better it is.
That's great. Yeah, I have felt that as well. Just in business calls, you've so much more humanizing, and you're in an intimate place. It's not this neutral conference room, but you're actually in someone's home when you're having a conversation with them. And I think, for our students who are tuned in here, being in your dorm room probably doesn't hurt to pick up your laundry as well, and tidy up a little bit behind, and not have too many distractions like I have here in my office. Grant, I'd love to hear from you, as being an insider in a company, and a large one at that, communicating things to candidates. We all know it's a two-way street with recruiting, and you want to help candidates really understand if it's a good fit for them. Whether it's company culture or the day in a life of a certain job role. How have you been communicating that with your candidates when you can't bring them into the space and walk them around and let them interact with different teams?
That's a great question. That's actually one of my favorite parts in the interview process, is after you go through the reviewing of the resumes and phone interviews and all that, is when you get the candidate on site and get to meet them in the lobby and show them around the office. It's big for both us on the recruiting team, but also the candidate as well, because they're able to experience more about like the company culture and the work environment and meet the team they might be working with. So along those lines, what I really try to do and would encourage everybody to be doing is asking a lot of questions. We need to pull back that veil, and I want to be able to give candidates as accurate of a picture as possible of our company culture, of the strengths to it, as well as like the weaknesses. It's a conversation that goes both ways, and so we just want to have that transparency. And so that's something that I'm always encouraging candidates to do. It's just like, I'm an open book, ask questions, and I think that goes across the board for recruiters. And kind of along those lines, something that I didn't realize until I was in the recruiter seat is like, we want candidates to do well in the interview process. Like, we are rooting for you. We're your biggest fan in a way, even though sometimes we can't say that. So hopefully that kind of humanizes a little bit, kind of like Angela was saying.
Yeah, it can be an intimidating situation for a candidate, especially when you're hunting for your first job and really asking those questions that you're curious about. And I think what some folks miss is that curiosity is really an expression of interest. And by asking those questions, assuming you ask them in the right and appropriate way, can really help to show how much you care about this position or the company and how much research you've done. So that's really great to hear. I'm also curious, students have a multitude of tools that they can use to help communicate their past experiences and whatnot. Some of these things like, LinkedIn that most folks are on, or Handshake, which is a university focused tool. Grant, just to continue with you, if you wouldn't mind sharing, how do you guys leverage those online social profiles, whether it be LinkedIn, Handshake, or other types of social networks?
Yeah, good question. They're all the more valuable, especially with this time of COVID. So for us, I mean, this is speaking more towards Vicasa's viewpoint. We really like the LinkedIn side of things. Handshake's great, like our recruiters use that, but our hiring managers use LinkedIn as well. And so that's something like I've got some hiring managers that when I forward them a candidate that I'm excited about, that's the first thing they do is they're pulling them up on LinkedIn and taking a look. So that's definitely a good resource to put some time into and keeping updated. A couple, I guess, tips on that, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this as well, but would be just having like dates for employment on there. That's something that, without the dates, it doesn't do us as much good. So that would be a big one. Another thing is in the about section. It's nice to hear a little bit more about maybe somebody's goals or career directions or passions. And once again, it goes back to the humanizing side of it. And so even like if you have like a gap in employment and we're prior to COVID traveling for 6 months or something, put that down in there, and then we just have all the more visibility, which is super helpful for both the recruiter as well as the hiring manager.
Yes.
Angela, do you want to?
If I could add a few more, specifically when it comes to UI, UX, and product, Dribbble and Behance seem to be ones that I've seen people put some pretty extensive portfolios on there, and it's huge. And hopefully when you apply for a job, there's an application section where you can actually put links to your portfolio. If they don't have that, definitely add it in a cover letter or a summary. From a recruiting standpoint, there's nothing more heartbreaking for me when I see an awesome resume and there's no cover letter, there's no summary, or even when you're doing a phone screen with somebody and you ask them if they have any questions or if there's anything else they would like to add, and they say, nope, not really. It's like, oh, you just missed such an opportunity to share more. Like, the recruiter is your friend. And heck, even if you get a rejection letter or a rejection notice, like, that's a bridge and a partnership and an opportunity to say thank you. There's actual ATS systems where I'll flag people if they're really professional and it's like, man, this person is so resilient. They have handled rejection like 3 times. You can actually put a gold star or a green thumbs up. Conversely, if you have somebody react negatively to a reject letter and they tell you to go pound sand, or they're really rude or mean, you make a note and that's in ink, and then that follows their resume trail. So yeah, I just wanted to jump in and mention those tools.
That's great. Yeah. And Lauren, we have a pro UX designer with us today. So how have you shared your portfolio? Maybe give an inside look at what the pros do.
Yeah, I would say, so I have a portfolio, and I think it's a running joke with a lot of designers. If they're not looking for work, their portfolio is out of date. And mine is always out of date, just because I'm constantly working on something new and forget to add that stuff to my portfolio. I would say when I'm hiring, or when I've been interviewing, is I really try to put together something that's really in depth, and I include work that I'm proud of. I think it's easy to just, put a list together of everything you've done and put screenshots in there, but like actually spend the time and curate it. Put the things in there that you're most proud of, the things that made the biggest impact, if it's financially or, improved customer experience or delight. Includes those ones you're most proud of in there, because when you're having to go and speak to it in an interview, you're just going to be more passionate about, the thing you did a good job on versus, oh yeah, I did that 4 years ago, I kind of don't remember it. So take some time and really hone that into something that you're proud of. And I would say on the note of including your portfolio, I'm right in the process of hiring another designer. If you're going to share your portfolio and it's password protected, include that password in the cover letter, in the resume somewhere, because I've gotten quite a few where it's password protected. And I try to reach out and get that password, but like it just makes it a little bit easier for me to view your work when I have it the first thing.
Good tip. Simple things sometimes get overlooked in the process. And I really liked what you said. I think helping to frame all aspects of the recruiting process, from your resume, your cover letter, maybe your portfolio, is all part of telling the story. And that story is going to translate into your interaction with a company. And so I think that's a really nice a framing for it. I would love to hear, Jessica, from you, kind of switching gears here about skills. So a lot of the folks attending this panel, they're still students. They've got time to upskill, add things into their, their bag of tricks. What are some things that you find to be most in demand right now? What are employers looking for? And what really sets a candidate apart in that small section where it says skills and abilities?
Good question. And I would say it's going to depend on the role and depend on sort of the type of company you're applying to and what you want to be doing and what you want to be building. One of the things, above anything else and sort of on theme here, is your written communication skills have just gotta, they've got to excel now. We're no longer in a world where, unfortunately, I think you can kind of skate by just being there and being in person and kind of building rapport with your teammates via, a conversation at the water cooler. You've got to be able to communicate via a written channel. And I think that that's something that gets a bit overlooked in terms of, technical acumen and technical abilities. And similarly, sort of and again, it's sort of on theme, and I feel like it's sort of skirting the question, but I just think it's real. You got to be able to build rapport within a team virtually, right? And again, that's going to be different than how you might have built rapport had you been able to, walk down to your friend's desk and just say, hey, what's up? And, can you tell me about this project? I think also asking for help. You cannot be afraid to ask for help if you're not familiar with how to write, a certain language, or if you're not familiar with a certain framework. You have to be really honest and direct and be able to reach out for that help up front, rather than waiting for somebody to be like, hey, you're dwindling here, what's going on, right? So in terms of kind of overall, I know those are more sort of like intrinsic skill sets. I think in terms of those hard skills, I really, it's really going to be contingent upon those roles and what you're wanting to do. One of the things I think that's really important, Grant, I'm glad you brought it up, because we have to be realistic here that, you're graduating in the time of COVID. There's a very high likelihood that it may take you some time to find that next gig. But what I will absolutely recommend is don't spend 6 months doing working at a coffee shop or whatever, and let all of those hard skills go by the wayside. Make sure you're maintaining your skill set. Make sure you're staying current. Make sure you're, if a recruiter asks you, and this is one of the first questions I always ask every technical candidate, is tell me about the last project that you worked on. What did you like about it? And what was the most challenging piece of it? And if you can't sit there and tell me, oh, well, last night I've been working on this hobby and I'm trying Ajax, and I'm, doing all this stuff with, new JavaScript libraries, and you can't riddle those things off to me, then that's a sign. And that tells me that you haven't stayed current, or it's been too long that you don't remember. So those would be some of the things that I would absolutely recommend. And frankly, there are so many resources out there right now because of COVID that you don't have an excuse. Right? It used to be, if I wanted to go take some courses at Stanford, I'd have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. But guess what? You can take e-learning courses now for free. So I would definitely encourage, maintain that skill set. And the last piece, and I know we need to be conscious of time, but don't forget that just because we can't meet in person doesn't mean you can't continue to build relationships with people that you want a similar career path to. You know, if you're looking and you're sitting on this call going, God, I really want to be a senior UI UX designer. And Lauren, not to volunteer you, but I'm sure that Lauren would love to hear from somebody that was like early in their career stage and wanted to know, hey, how'd you get there? How'd you maneuver this field? How did you build your career? What were the steps you took? I mean, networking still exists, and it's still very much so. You still very much so have the ability to reach out and build those connections. And everybody's on LinkedIn. Just about everybody's on LinkedIn nowadays. Look up people that you think you'd like to emulate and ask them.
That's great. And Grant, if you wouldn't mind just kind of rounding that topic out, I've heard and seen in some of the questions that it can be intimidating when you read a job description, and some companies are a little looser with their requirements, quote unquote, of what they expect out of a candidate. What's your advice to a candidate if they see in requirements they need a certain skill that they don't have? How do they address that in the interviewing process? Should they not apply? What's your recommendation?
That's a great question. I would lean towards encouraging people to apply and have that conversation. I wouldn't like skirt around like, oh, I don't have, X experience. I would, be forthcoming and, having that conversation with the recruiter, or even addressing it in the cover letter. That could be something where it's like, I realize I don't have this experience. I have these other experiences. Here's examples of how I've learned things quickly, things like that. But I would definitely encourage people to, apply, even if they might have, 80% of the requirements or something like that, or even less, and at least have the conversation started. Because who knows, it could be something that 6 months down the road, a similar position opens up that they could be a fit for, something along those lines.
That's great. Yeah, being transparent always pays off in the process. And as someone else said, it's really the recruiter who's rooting for you in the process, and you want to work together as a team, and part of that's through trust. So unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. We're running out of time, but I just want to thank everyone, Angela, Lauren, Jessica, and Grant. Thank you guys for sharing, and hopefully folks were able to engage in the live chat during this. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next year.